Hello. Uh, it's Sunday, barely, as I'm filming this. It's nearly midnight. Um, and that means that we've got another alphabet tag from Jim. A little. Usually I do these earlier in the day on Sunday. I often am the first person to get the tag out. But All Elite Wrestling's All Out pay per view is tonight. Um, I think I've mentioned before, and you've probably noticed, sometimes my shirts, that I'm a pro wrestling fan. Um, but a lot of my passion had kind of waned in the last year and a half in pandemic times. Not being able to go see live wrestling, that always keeps me invigorated. And then the product that was being made without crowds just wasn't as exciting, and things just kind of were stale for a while, and especially WWE. But the last month, a lot of really exciting things have happened. Most notably, CM Punk, who's one of my all-time favorites, returning from retirement to AEW after almost 8 years without wrestling. And tonight he wrestled his first match in almost 8 years. And they also had surprise debuts of a number of different wrestlers adding to the AEW team, including huge gets that debuted at the end of the night. Bryan Danielson, better maybe known for his time in WWE as Daniel Bryan, former multi-time WWE champion, and Adam Cole, who was a huge powerhouse in indie wrestling for many years, then went to WWE, spent a number of years at their NXT developmental brand where he dominated. He was multi-time champion. He was the leader of the faction, the Undisputed Era, which was one of the biggest things in NXT. But they never brought him up to the main roster. He did wrestle in the Royal Rumble one year, but that was just a one-off thing. But then he let his contract expire, and he came to AEW. No big surprise. His girlfriend, Britt Baker, is the women's champion at AEW right now, and he's also very good friends with the Elite, members of the Elite, the Jackson brothers, the Young Bucks, and Kenny Omega, who wrestle for the company and are also vice presidents of the company, creative directors of the company. Anyways, I'm rambling about wrestling. It was one of the best wrestling pay-per-views probably ever. There was only one match on the card that was not really good, and it was like a very short, under 5 minute squash match involving Paul White, who you probably would know better as the Big Show, who has left WWE and is at AEW now. But yeah, so all of this is to say that it was a 4+ hour show, and then I needed some time to kind of let it marinate. Now it's almost midnight as I'm starting to film this. I probably won't edit it before I go to sleep, so this is probably not going to come out until tomorrow, until Monday. But it's the P tag. We're getting towards the end of the alphabet. I can feel the end looming. I wonder if Jim is starting to feel any sort of anxiousness about the end. What are you gonna do after? What am I gonna do after? This is like, I'm in a big, long reading slump right now. Having trouble getting myself to actually read books. I did start the first Vernon Subutex book. I read the first few pages last night. But these weekly tags keep my head in the game, keep me thinking about books, keep me making content. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see what happens. This is a very protracted introduction. Let's actually do some prompts. P is for porridge. What did you have for breakfast today? I had some Eggo frozen waffles with syrup. Eggo waffles are a frequent staple of my breakfasts because they require so little effort and preparation. I can just pop them in the toaster. It's very easy. It's not high quality food, but it gets the job done. P is for painter. Who's your favorite painter? I was raised around a lot of fine arts. My mother has a bachelor's degree in fine arts and then has 2 master's degrees in fine arts, one in painting and one in drawing, and works professionally as a picture framer for a company that does custom framing and installation and shipping for private collectors and companies that have collections as well, like General Mills, which is a Minneapolis-based company. They do all the framing for like art on General Mills campus, and they have a lot of stuff. So my mom is big into fine art. I grew up going to museums and galleries a lot, going to art openings and stuff, and eating lots of hors d'oeuvres. So I've always had a great appreciation for fine arts. We have a lot of really great small galleries here in the Twin Cities, as well as 2. We have more than 2, but 2 major museums. There's the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, the MIA, which is in South Minneapolis, and that is a sort of all-purpose art gallery. Stuff from all ages, from ancient to modern. And then we have the Walker Art Museum, also in Minneapolis, which is a modern art gallery, and famously on its campus has the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden, which the iconic piece is the sculpture Spoon Bridge and Cherry, which has become sort of a icon or a symbol of the Twin Cities. It's on postcards and things, very iconic. It's located right next to this interchange that's colloquially known as Spaghetti Junction, because like so many different things kind of all connect. It's right on the western border of downtown Minneapolis, and so when you're going onto 94, which is the major east-west thoroughfare through the cities, you can see the Spoon Bridge and Cherry on the side of the highway, and it's very cool. So I've gotten to experience a lot of great art because of that. But to answer the actual question, who were my favorite painters? My tastes definitely skew to the modern. It's just, my literature tastes are the same, So, Francis Bacon is a really big inspiration, influence for me. I'm a big fan of body horror, and I feel like he's sort of in the fine art world, he's sort of the king of the distorted human figure, and the reduction of people to meat, and he's also just kind of like he makes scary shit, like the screaming popes and whatnot. Another person I admire a lot is Jean-Michel Basquiat. It's a very sad sort of story. His life, he was like a very impoverished sort of street kid, very hard upbringing. He came up in the world of New York City street art, graffiti art in the 80s alongside people like Keith Haring, and then sort of crossed over into the fine arts world, became a sort of wunderkind got sort of taken in as a protege of Andy Warhol, and then died very young of a drug overdose. But he made a lot of paintings, even though he died very young. And he would paint on like cardboard and like wooden doors and all sorts of stuff. And he has a very distinct visual style that is immediately recognizable. And I've seen it imitated, but never accurately. Most notably, I feel like there was this movement in like the 90s where like Taco Bell like redesigned all of their like art in the inside the Taco Bells that to be like rip off. It looked like Basquiat paintings of people eating tacos. Very weird choice. I think at this point they've basically remodeled all the stores so those don't exist anymore, but it was a real thing. And then my third favorite painter is a Japanese painter, and the only one of these three that's still alive, by the name of Makoto Ida, who doesn't have a ton of notoriety in America or outside of Japan even. I had been exposed to one of his pieces but not known what it was, because a sort of cropped portion of his painting Harakiri Schoolgirls was used as the cover of Laurel Halo's first record, Quarantine, which is an amazing, amazing record. But then I've learned who he was and started to actually become a fan of his when I worked at Half Price Books. We got in this book, I'm not going to be able to remember the name of it, but I have it in a box somewhere, that was basically made in celebration of this art show that was put on in New York City in the 2000s that featured a bunch of Japanese painters, artists, who had basically like never shown work in North America before. And in that book was this painting by Ida that was called it's called The Giant Member Fuji versus King Ghidorah. And so this is a piece that's like very laden with your references to Japanese pop culture. So the Giant Member Fuji, of course, is a character from the Ultraman series, is a woman who can grow very large. King Ghidorah, of course, is a three-headed dragon kaiju from the Godzilla series of films. But the painting itself is modeled and a reference to the painting Dream of the Fisherman's Wife, which was a very notorious, well-known, iconic painting from the 19th century, woodblock painting, Japanese painting. A lot of people sort of pinpoint that as the origin of the tentacle porn trope that Japan is associated with. It's one of my favorite paintings. It's so evocative, and a great piece of what's commonly referred to as eroguro, which is a sort of genre that is kind of distinctly Japanese, and Japanese in origin, though of course other people outside of Japan make and promote it. But it's sort of a portmanteau of the words erotic and grotesque. So it's, combining things that are very sexual with things that are very disgusting or violent. And another one of my favorite, painter, whatever, Suehiro Maruo, who is a manga artist, mangaka. He's another big name. He's more associated with Eroguro than Ida is. But he's a great Japanese artist who I admire a lot. And he sort of came to prominence in the West because John Zorn, the legendary avant-garde jazz saxophonist and composer, used a number of his illustrations as album artwork for the debut release of John Zorn's Naked City, which is one of my favorite albums of all time. Okay, that's enough art talk. Let's move on. P is for Police Procedural. What is the last police procedural you read? I don't really read police procedurals very often. I can't think of a single one that I've read. I read mysteries so rarely, and usually when I do end up reading mysteries, they tend to be like private detective stories, not cop stories. I haven't made it a secret of my political leanings and my disdain for police. And I have very little interest in things that glorify police. That being said, I am a big fan of Law and Order Special Victims Unit. So that is my go-to police procedural. P is for playlists. Have you created any YouTube playlists? So I have made some that most of the ones that I have made have been to organize my own videos for how they're displayed when you go to the splash page for my channel, putting them into categories. Before that, the main thing that I had upkept was just my favorites playlist, which, that was mainly, I was mainly curating that playlist from like 2011 or 12 up until maybe 2018 or so. The peak years that I was like on Reddit, and people were like making stuff that was like short and funny and interesting, and meme culture was much more on YouTube. I feel like in the time since, we've moved away, video meme content has moved towards TikTok. And, I was a big fan of subreddits like YouTube Haiku, which is a subreddit for 14-second or less videos. And that's where like people like Gus Johnson got his start doing skits on YouTube Haiku. I don't really, find much to put in the favorites playlist anymore because most of the stuff that I watch on a regular basis is longer form. At this point, that's what most content creators are doing because you have to make a video 10 minutes in order to put mid-rolls in it, and you can't really make money unless you're putting mid-rolls in your videos. Playlist though, I always, in my mind, the playlist is a Spotify thing, and it's an interesting world because I come from the era of the mix CD. I have no delusions. I'm not that old, mixtapes, I have experienced them. They did exist. I've made them before, but by the time I was, you know, decently into music around the turn of the millennium, CD burners existed. I still have a ton of burned CDs. Me and a friend were looking through a bunch of old ones. Hang on, I've got them here by my computer. Let me show you this burned CD. So, this is from the era of the label maker. I'm sure my millennial and older viewers will remember the era of the label maker for your CDRs. So here we have a mix of music by Blink-182. It's got my name on it there. And then, as you can see, we have a South Park Darth Maul. This is possibly the most 1999 thing in the world that exists. This might be the most representative artifact of the year 1999, a Blink-182 burned CD with South Park Darth Maul on it. Now that we have Spotify playlists, though, we are not limited by 79 minutes of content. We can make epic playlists, and I have a couple of very epic playlists that I have made. And Spotify, it's amazing. As someone who remembers the before times, before digital music existed, the fact that I just have 99% of recorded music available to me instantaneously all the time on every device that I have is absolutely amazing. It's also very bad because they don't pay artists nearly enough, and the CEO of Spotify is a billionaire off of the backs of other people's labor, and he refuses to adequately pay the people who have made him his money, and that sucks. But I do support artists in other ways. If I really like albums, I make sure to buy them physically, because that is how bands are going to make their money. And I go to shows, I see them on tours. That is how bands make money. But in the realm of playlists, I've got a couple big ones that are both styled after local radio stations. So this is maybe in concept may seem a little niche to the Minnesota area, but I think you'll understand. So the first one I made is called 93X circa 2002. 93X is the local hard rock metal station. And so 2002 was sort of like the peak, maybe just past the peak of nu metal. I was very into nu metal at the time that it was popular. So you've got your Korns, your Limp Bizkits, your Systems of a Down, your Deftones, and then they also played grunge music from the 90s and Metallica and Guns N' Roses and things like that. And so I created this playlist of basically just songs that would have been being played on 93X. Around that time, it's 162 songs in 12 hours, and you can just throw it on shuffle and create a facsimile of that time. I made that playlist in May of last year. Had a great time doing it. And then its sequel playlist is entitled Cities 97 circa 2001. Cities 97 is the adult alternative contemporary station here in the cities. And so they were home to, the adult alternative alt rock sort of sound of the mid to late 90s. And that would be things like, early music by Train, Collective Soul, Dave Matthews Band, Blues Traveler, Matchbox 20, the Goo Goo Dolls, Blind Melon, Hootie and the Blowfish. And then some older things, like Edie Brickell and Tracy Chapman, going back to the 80s, that they would play to. And so in July of this year, I spent a ton of time making this playlist happen. Not quite as big as the 93X when it's 156 songs and 11 hours long, but I think it's more fun. I like it better, personally. And it's since I made it, the last month and some change since I made it, it's been the main thing I listen to is just throwing this massive 90s adult alternative playlist on shuffle and listening to stuff from that. There's just so much good stuff on there. Rediscovering a lot of songs that I had forgotten about completely. I was unlocking these vaults in my brain. Songs like Sonny Came Home by Sean Colvin, or As I Lay Me Down by Sophie B. Hawkins, or Bound for the Floor by Local H, or She's So High by Tal Bachman. Just songs that are so iconic, but it just for whatever reason fell into the recesses of my brain. And I've got other playlists too. I keep a Stuff to Listen To playlist. That's whenever I read about or hear about or see an album come out or read about something that sounds interesting, I throw it on this playlist, and then I have them all in one place. So when I'm I want to hear something new, I can go there and pick something out. I made a playlist in the wake of the George Floyd murder called Fuck 12. It's a bunch of anti-police songs. I have a playlist that I made after I got divorced. It's called Death Songs. It's just all really, really depressing, extremely sad songs. You've got your No Children by the Mountain Goats. You've got your Cry Wanks. You got your Sufjans, your Mountain Goats, your Smog, your Carissa's Weird, your Songs Ohia, your Shoo Shoo, etc. Vic Chestnut. And a couple others, and that one's smaller, that one's 40 songs. I've got one that's all love songs, it's also 40 songs. I've got one that's entitled Shower Rap, that's just a bunch of rap music that I like, that's all kind of high energy, that I like to listen to while I take a shower. That's the name. I have one that I made just kind of as a little fun experiment that's called Sophomore Year, that was sophomore year was sort of the year that I got really into indie music, I guess you would call it. It's 2005. I had dipped my toes. At that point I had discovered certain people, mostly through happenstance. I had gotten into Elliott Smith because of him being in the Royal Tenenbaums. I had gotten into the Shins because of Garden State. And then I had sort of stumbled upon a few other bands like Deerhoof and things like that. But it was really when I found Pitchfork, which was in sort of the summer between my freshman and sophomore years. That was when I found, I think what it was that I found bands I found Arcade Fire when Funeral came out, and then I found Sufjan Stevens when Illinois came out, and then through that, then I found Pitchfork. And Pitchfork has changed a lot over the 25 years that it has existed, and it was very different in 2005. But they had made those lists, best albums of the 90s, best albums of the 80s, and best albums of the year. And going through those lists and then getting on SoulSeek and downloading MP3s of them, loading them up on my iPod Mini. that was like a really life-changing year for me. Sophomore year was a huge revolutionary year. Uh, just like really sort of coming into my own. This is when I started like seriously making music and art, like with like a serious drive and intention, and making albums and CDs and giving them to my friends. I started performing at open mic night at this coffee shop every week and getting really serious about playing guitar and singing. And then my music taste expanded hugely. I discovered so many bands that have stayed with me over the years. And so I made this playlist sophomore year, 2005 to 2006. That was just all music that I heard for the first time during that, year, that meant a lot to me. So I picked out, there are only one song from each album, but there are multiple songs from singular artists, just one per album. So we've got represented here Sigur Rós, Animal Collective, The Microphones, Neutral Milk Hotel, Sufjan Stevens, Yola Tango, My Bloody Valentine, The 11 Tremor Control, Pavement, Modest Mouse. I knew Modest Mouse before, but this is from Lonesome Crowded West, which I didn't listen to until sophomore year. Interpol, which is technically a cheat. I did start listening to Interpol a year before that. Same with Arcade Fire. Broken Social Scene, Slater-Kinney, The New Pornographers, LCD Sound System, Aphex Twin, The Books, Lightning Bolt, Black Dice, Wolf Eyes, Fiery Furnaces, Boris, Devendra Banhart, Art Brut, Sun, Mad Villain, Quasimodo, Kanye, Ween. So many artists that have stuck with me over the years. So that's a nice sort of little nostalgia trip for me personally. A lot. There's the context, the cultural context of a lot of this music has changed a lot in the 15, 16 years that have passed. Neutral Milk Hotel has become something very different than it was in 2005. Still a great band. Still one of my all-time favorite albums. In the Airplane Over the Sea, I should say. But it is, it's a meme. It's at the time, it was sort of thought of as one of the better albums of the 90s. And now it's kind of thought of as one of the best albums of all time for people who are like music heads or whatever, particularly like younger people. The rise of like the MU board on 4chan, and the idea of like the Mutant and MU Core. A lot of these albums are sort of, and the other thing is that I feel like a lot of now, because of Spotify and the profligation of the internet, and people like Anthony Fantano and music nerdery and things like that have become much more accessible and mainstream and available to young people in a way that it wasn't necessarily to me when I was young. And so like when I was 15 and I was going to public school and I was listening to shit like this, to My Bloody Valentine and Neutral Milk Hotel and Animal Collective, I knew 2 or 3 people in my 3,000, 2,000 person school that also listened to it, that I could visibly identify. One of them was my first girlfriend, and then the other one was a guy who would wear t-shirts. He'd have like a Pavement t-shirt, and I'd be like, hey, you have a Pavement t-shirt. But yeah, it was a big year for me. Like I said, I got my first girlfriend that year. It was a lot happened. And then at the end of that year was when I had this sort of big falling out with a bunch of my friends, and had a sort of existential crisis, and then decided to go to art school. I left public school behind. So yeah. This video is so long. I'm going on so many long digressions. I've only done 4 prompts. Let's move forward. P is for publisher. Do you have a favorite publisher? So, it feels really silly. Thinking of Sam Hyde now.
Don't you feel silly? Don't you feel stupid? Don't you feel a little ashamed?
That I never sort of did this before recently, but I had never really thought about approaching reading the way that I would approach music, in the sense of a label being a gateway in the, or a publisher being a gateway in the way that a label could be. There are a lot of very, very amazing independent music labels. A lot, of course, there's a lot of punk labels like SST or Alternative Tentacles, or there's so many. And then there's just independent labels like Kill Rock Stars or K Records or Sub Pop even, and it's just, there's so many. And that's a good way to find. I discovered it was a good way to find a band. If you like a band, you look at the other bands that label has. A lot of the times they'll tour together, and that's a way to find new music. I'd never sort of put the thought together that I could do the same thing with books, or that I should do the same thing with books for smaller publishers, because I had never really done a lot of reading of stuff from indie publishers until fairly recently. I think that I always kind of had this very stupid sort of hoity-toity stigma that, like indie publishers are like glorified self-published. Feel embarrassed for myself saying something like that. But this year I read the book Negative Space by B.R. Yeager, which has been my favorite thing I've read all year. And that was published by a press called Apocalypse Party Press. And I haven't read anything else by Apocalypse Party, but I have wanted to, and I'm very aware of other things that they have published, and plan on reading them. And then I also read, somewhat recently, that was the last thing I read, the story collection Bonding by Maggie Siebert, which was published by Expat Press. And both of these publishers specialize in like transgressive and horror fiction. And so looking at the other things on those rosters has really been eye-opening to me, that there's this whole world of transgressive, experimental, cool literature that I've been missing out on. I think that I've wasted a lot of time feeling like I'm supposed to be reading certain things instead of reading the things that actually make me happy. I'm nothing against major publishers. There are a lot of, they do great stuff. I really like the FSG Originals series, that they're like straight to paperback books that are maybe more experimental. And they published like Threats by Amelia Gray, and they did the original print run of the Southern Reach trilogy by Jeff Vandermeer. Who did this Despentes book? I think it's FSG Originals. They published the English translation of Vernon Subutext. So that's cool. I like them. I don't know. P is for pilgrimage. Have you made a pilgrimage, literary or religious? Haven't. Oh, well, okay. I have made maybe a little bit of a religious or a literary pilgrimage. Not a religious pilgrimage. I'm not a religious cat. If you watch my content, you probably know that. However, also if you watch my content, you know that I am a longtime fan of David Foster Wallace. Speaking of things that have a very different context than they did in 2005. So, Wallace, he's spent time in many places. He's originally from Illinois. He went to college in a couple places. And then he was, after he had gotten his MFA and published his first novel, he went back to grad school to study mathematics, if I'm remembering correctly, in Boston, and was there for a while, and sort of while he was there had a sort of nervous breakdown and ended up getting put in the psych ward. And then after he got out of the psych ward, he had this very toxic and creepy relationship with Mary Karr, the author of Mary Karr. A lot of this didn't come to light until after he was dead and the biography of him was published, which I never read, but I've gathered a lot of this stuff, over the years. And Mary Karr is on the faculty in Syracuse at SU. And so Wallace followed her there to try and woo her, I guess. And it was while he was living in a shithole apartment in the Westcott neighborhood across the street from the tiny little food co-op that he wrote the first draft of Infinite Jest. And so all I knew, the information that was out there was that he lived in a shitty apartment across the street from a food co-op in Westcott. And I figured out where the food co-op in Westcott was, and I went there, and across the street from it was a shitty apartment building. And so I think somewhere there's probably a picture of me in front of it. But, I lived in Syracuse for a year, and so I made sure to go and sort of see the place where that book was written. I guess you'd count that as a pilgrimage. The only other sort of pilgrimage I've taken was when I was in Seattle. I went to the park that is adjacent to the property where Kurt Cobain lived when he committed suicide. And you can see his house from the park. The garage where he died has since been torn down. But the park sort of functions as this sort of unofficial memorial to him. It's covered, there's benches and stuff that are just covered in people writing graffiti, tributes to him from all around the world when they come to visit to pay their respects. And so I didn't leave my mark or anything, but I did visit the park to see his house and pay respects and show reverence to how important he was to me when I was a kid, and all the things that he did for me, even though he died when I was 3 years old when he died. So P is for play. What is your favorite play? I have to confess, I don't read a ton of plays, and I don't see a ton of plays. I don't see a ton of plays largely because it's prohibitively expensive for the most part to see live theater. Not across the board, but a lot of the time. And it's sad because I live in Minneapolis, which has a huge theater scene. I remember, I don't know if this is still true, but when I was in high school, at least, we had the most theater seats per capita of any city in the country other than New York. There are a ton of small theaters, and then there's, of course, the Guthrie Theater, which is a very big, very prestigious theater in downtown Minneapolis. But my favorite favorite plays. I like Waiting for Godot. I like No Exit. It's a good one. I don't have any that I think of as being like amongst my favorite pieces of literature, though. I've never had a play like really fuck me up and imprint itself on me forever in that way. Probably just, not digging hard enough, so. Most of my play viewing was done, when I was in high school. I went to a performing arts school, so we would do productions that I would go to, my friends would be in, and that was a lot of fun. I miss that. P is for Paris. What was the last book you read set in Paris? That's Serotonin by Michel Houellebecq. Houellebecq is a contemporary French author. The parts in Paris are fairly minimal in Serotonin, but he does go to Paris. Most of it is spent in the Parisian countryside, though. Most of the text. Very good book. One of the favorite things I've read this year. I have since acquired 3 other Houellebecq books, but I have not read any of them yet. Definitely not someone that I would necessarily recommend outright to everyone. He's controversial. He's considered a bit of an enfant terrible. And he, his most famous book, Submission, is very controversial for its portrayal of Islamic people. So, be forewarned. But I did really like Serotonin a lot. P is for paperback. Do you prefer paperbacks or hardbacks? Paperbacks. Vastly prefer paperbacks. Hardbacks, they're bigger, they're heavier, they're harder to read, they're more cumbersome, they're not as easy to carry around with you. You have dust jackets, and that's a whole thing. Pretty much the only way that hardcovers are superior is in the quality of the binding. It's going to last longer, and not get damaged as easily. But for all practical purposes, I prefer paperbacks, and they're cheaper. P is for pandemic. Have you read any books about pandemics? So when I was in junior high, I had to read Richard Preston's The Hot Zone for school, which is a book about nonfiction book about viruses, with a lot of focus on the Ebola virus, and the pandemic, the outbreak of Ebola in Africa in the 80s. I have read The Stand by Stephen King. I read that in my sophomore year of high school. I tried to reread it earlier this year because CBS All Access did a original miniseries adaptation of The Stand, which I watched, and it was okay. But it made me be like, oh, I should reread the book, and I got the book, and I read 200 pages of it, and I was like, I can't. I think that my time with Stephen King has passed, and I'm not. I can't go back. And then also earlier this year, I finally read Station 11, which I'd had on my shelf for a number of years, by Emily St. John Mandel. Jim mentioned this book in his video as well. Very good book. That is about a world after, the post-apocalyptic world after a flu pandemic kills, 99% of people. It follows a female narrator who is part of a traveling band of performers who stage performances of Shakespeare plays and concerts of classical music for the survivors of the plague. Anyways, thanks for sticking around. I am reading a little bit, hopefully more soon. There might be a actual book review in the near future. I know it's been over a month since I've read a book, so I'm overdue. Thanks.